Hey everybody, what's up from Pokemon Classics, reminding you that the classics never go out of style. Recently, I was just finishing up a PSA submission, and it got me thinking, is PSA grading in 2022 a trap?
It's a trap!
Now what I mean by that is, as I'm sure you're all aware, PSA recently announced the lowering of their prices due to the July special, with card submissions being at just $18 a card. Now I say just $18 a card because that's a pretty substantial rollback from earlier prices. About a year ago, we saw cards limited to the $100 service level, and then they were pulled back to $50 a card, then just a month ago, $30 a card, and now here we are sitting pretty at just $18 a card. What could go wrong with that? But I do think this could pose a significant problem for a number of collectors out there that have been sitting on an abundant inventory waiting for this type of reopening. If you're not careful about what you send in and about pre-grading and assessing condition, this might end up taking a loss for a number of people. So today, I'm going to hit you with 3 factors to keep in consideration when determining which cards, if any, are worthy of submitting to PSA grading in 2022. Now, the first of these factors is understanding the condition scales that are used for grading and being able to pre-grade those cards yourself accurately and effectively. Next, you need to understand market dynamics and how to effectively appraise those cards, their potential values, as well as the volume within the population reports, and also that are out there ungraded. Lastly, you have to know about the costs and the expenses that come along with the process, whether it's from the initial purchases of the cards themselves, the actual grading costs and fees, but also the fees that come along with selling and taxes. All of that is necessary to making a wise and informed decision about how to proceed in this market. First, let's take a look at condition. Now, most grading companies, including PSA, evaluate cards on these 4 factors: the surface of the card, the centering of the borders, the corners of the card, and the edges. And together, each of these factors is averaged out to determine a numerical score, 1 being the lowest and 10 being a pristine gem mint copy. Now, I'm not going to go over each one of these in excruciating detail, but if you want a grade-by-grade breakdown of every one of the PSA scores, along with tangible examples of actual Pokemon cards, I already made a video like that, which I'll leave linked up here in the corner. Definitely check it out, it's a great resource. But what I will comment on is more generically what each of these factors looks like. Something a lot of people miss is when appraising the card, you really have to be sensitive to the front of the card, particularly the surface area on the holographic foil, if you're dealing with a holographic card. Now, these are very susceptible to print lines, which come right out of the pack, so even though you might have a brand new card, it could still have some of those vertical or horizontal print lines, which will often lower the card down to a PSA 8 at best. You also want to check the centering. The borders matter when it comes to determining what grade a card is going to receive, and often a miscentered, misaligned border can be the difference of a card not achieving a 10, and in some cases, not even earning a 9. So those are 2 things you want to be aware of. While the surface area and the centering of the borders do affect the back of the card as well, in my experience, the more common form of damage that you're going to find on the back relates to the corners as well as the edges. We call this whitening or edge wear, but it's something you want to look out for, and obviously the more edge wear that you find, the more whitening on those borders, the lower it's going to make the card grade. One of the pro tips I would personally recommend is to thoroughly inspect your card using a light source and some form of magnification to give it a deep, thorough look over. I'd like to offer one more piece of cautionary advice, and that's to never assume a PSA 10. Now, I know there's a lot of PokeTubers out there doing box breaks and pack openings that like to reference the PSA 10 price of a card that they just pulled, but in truth, even the vast majority of packed fresh, brand new pulled cards don't achieve a PSA 10, and I think it's unwise, foolish even, to assume the best possible outcome when more often than not, that's not going to be the case. So for me personally, when I'm assessing cards, when I'm pre-grading them, I max it out at a PSA 9 because that's still a mint card, and even in cases where it's on the fence between 2 grades, I like to assume the worst rather than the best. In fact, that's kind of my motto here. My recommendation is plan for the worst, but then hope for the best. That way you'll never be taken off guard. Next, let's talk about the broader market. Now, it's no secret that Pokemon is currently experiencing a bear market, with prices falling nearly universally across the TCG. It's also worth noting that PSA's estimated timeline for returns is about 150 days for the July submissions. Now again, this is just an estimate, but 150 days is actually a pretty long time. That's 5 months, perhaps 6 months if they're not including weekends, and a lot can change during that time. In fact, last month, when the price of grading was lowered to $30 per card, Pokemon leapfrogged its way up to number 1 as the most common type of card being submitted to PSA for grading. And now, with grading prices effectively being slashed in half, or almost half, at just $18 a card, I would have to assume that even more Pokemon cards are being submitted this month than last month. Is $18 a good deal for grading? Well, it could be, but it all depends on what cards are being sent in. That's why it is so valuable, perhaps necessary even, to have an accurate and reliable way to assess sales data. And so appraising value is something that we can never do with any sort of definitive certainty, but if we have the right tools available, we can at least recognize some trends. I don't think anywhere near enough people take advantage of the free resources that are available. There are a number of different websites out there that all compile and archive Pokemon sales data and make it easily accessible and searchable. PokemonPrice.com is one of those sites. It's very user-friendly. You can even toggle between different sets, individual cards, even look at population reports. Pokemon Data.io is quickly becoming one of my personal favorites. It's very up-to-date with the data that it pulls in, and again, very easily searchable, very navigatable, very user-friendly. Then you have PSAcard.com, which arranges cards by the individual PSA grade. It is specific to just PSA cards, but it's a good stop, very quick to navigate, and again, has a pretty comprehensive data pool. Then of course, you have eBay, since that's where most people do their buying and selling anyway. Looking at those completed listings, those sold items, is a great way to see what's recently sold. Anyway, I'll go ahead and leave links to all of these websites down in the description below, but if you're sending cards off for grading, it really is important to know how much each of these cards is valued at before determining which ones are worth sending in for grading versus which ones are perhaps better to keep raw. Lastly, let's take a look at some of the expenses that accompany grading and selling cards. Now, there are a number of hidden costs when it comes to selling cards that most people are unaware of. Some of these expenses are specific to grading, which are financial in terms of fees, but there's also different expenses in terms of time and liquidity, and just the cost of opportunity of keeping capital locked up in the actual cards themselves. One that a lot of people don't like to talk about, though, is taxes, and that's going to hit very differently this year due to changing tax laws for 2022. And so this begs the foundational question, is there a profit margin? And if you're grading cards with the intention on reselling, this question should be at the heart of every other phase of the process. When it comes to the cost, you have the initial cost of the actual purchase itself, the cost to grade the cards that you're sending in, the actual shipping fees, both to and from the grading, as well as to the end consumer once you eventually sell it, but also the taxes. There's a number of business taxes that get factored in, and we don't want to leave those out of the overall assessment. In fact, if you weren't already aware of this, the tax situation in 2022 has changed very significantly here in the United States for a lot of smaller sellers on online marketplaces. In the past, platforms like eBay used to send a 1099-K, that's a form, to the IRS and to you as the seller, only when you cross 200 transactions and 20,000 total dollars in sales, which didn't affect the vast majority of people on the platform. However, moving into 2022, this threshold has been changed to just $600 in sales. So a lot of people out there that haven't actually been reporting their income in the past, even though you're required to, are now going to be forced to, since the IRS will have a direct record of that mailed to them from eBay, from PayPal, from whichever online marketplace you're using. Now, I can tell you from experience, taxes are not to be taken lightly. And if you're operating as a one-person business selling on eBay or PayPal for a profit, perhaps you're a sole proprietor, maybe you're filing as an LLC, doesn't really matter. There's usually multiple different levels of taxes you'll need to pay, starting with federal taxes. Now, those range from 10% and as high as 37%, depending on which tax bracket you're in. Also, different states have different income taxes, some having a 0% income tax, others as high as 13.3%. Lastly, again, if you're operating as a profit-driven individual or business, you may have to pay self-employment tax, which is also 15.3%. Now, just as a disclaimer, these percentages are only on profits, so there are certain deductions like the original cost of goods, as well as different business expenses that you can subtract out, but it still ends up taking a pretty large bite out of that potential profit. Let's take a quick hypothetical to demonstrate this. Now let's assume you purchased a card for $20, which you had graded and then sold for $80. You took advantage of the July grading special, so that was $18. The shipping to and from PSA along with the insurance totaled about $3 per card. On top of that, you had the eBay fees when you made the eventual sale to your customer at $9.88. That's 12.35% of the total sale. Then on top of that, you had to pay for shipping to your customer for $3.58, which is a pretty good deal. That's a first-rate envelope rate. Now, your gross profit on this transaction was $25.54. When you factor in about 30% estimated tax, it could vary a little bit higher or lower. At $7.66 on that profit, well, we're left with $17.88. Now, don't get me wrong, that's still a profit. That's still pretty good. You're almost doubling your money on the original purchase, but it's not quite as glamorous as that $60 profit once seemed. But this is where the danger comes in. Let's assume that that $80 transaction was for a PSA 10, and with just one grade lower at a mint PSA 9, the same card sold for $40. Well, now you've lost money on the transaction. If you multiply that across hundreds of cards for a bulk submission, well, you're in for a bad time. So when grading cards, it really needs to be a calculated cost-benefit analysis, not an impulsive decision throwing everything against the wall simply to see what sticks. There's no doubt that PSA is still the undisputed king when it comes to graded card companies. But should you be PSA grading your cards here in 2022? Well, that depends on a number of different factors, but I do have 3 key takeaways for you. First, understand the condition scales used by grading companies. The more accurately and effectively you can pre-grade your cards prior to submission, the better it's going to serve you. Second, understand the market dynamics. Being able to effectively appraise and evaluate the prices of your cards, as well as the volumes and PSA populations, is just additional information that's going to serve you well. Lastly, and most importantly, understand the costs and expenses that are associated with grading cards as well as selling cards. That's the only way that'll lead to a proper risk assessment. And again, all this is a calculated risk. Anyway, let me know what you think of the $18 submission tier down in the comments below. And if you plan on making any submissions to PSA yourself here in July, I know personally that I have a number of cards that I'll be submitting, although I will be a bit more judicious on which cards I choose to send, as well as holding back some, hopefully anticipating some lower prices here in the future. Well, that's going to wrap it up for this one. I'm Pokemon Classics, reminding you that the classics never go out of style. Until next time, everybody, stay well, and we'll see y'all with the next video. Bye, everybody. Hey guys, I just wanted to say a quick thanks to my patrons for supporting the channel. If you have any interest in becoming a patron yourself, check out the link to my Patreon below. For more market analysis videos, you can click on one of these 2. They're pretty good, at least I think so. Anyway, you should go check them out. I dare you. I don't really know what else to say, so I'll just disappear now. Bye-bye.